right. So as I'm sharing my screen and doing all the technical stuff, I would invite you guys to share quickly in the chat because I don't think you know each other, and I don't know all of you yet. To introduce yourself in the chat. What's your name? Where are you joining in from today? And what cycle day are you on? If you know. Okay, I'm trying to get the thing to present. There we go. All right. Let me see if I can see the chat down here. Awesome. The technical stuff in the beginning is always the hardest 2 or 3 minutes. But it gives us all a chance to settle in again, take another sip of whatever drink we have. Perfect. Cool. All right, so we've got Oxford and Germany. I'm also joining from Germany. I'm hosting from Germany, so that's really cool. Yeah, cycle day 9 and cycle day 4. Awesome, very cool. We're different phases of the cycle then. My name is Natalie, and as soon as the presentation is ready, I can start telling you a bit more about myself. Here we go. I hope you see it. Let me know if it works for you. Okay, cool. Oh man, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining Living with Your Cycle. As I mentioned, my name is Natalie and I'm your host today. I'm the co-founder of the Baba Yaga Cycle Advisor, and I'm based in Northern Bavaria in Germany. And today I'm on my cycle day 17. So I'm expecting ovulation soon. I haven't confirmed it yet. Who or what is the Baba Yaga? Let me start with that for a minute. The Baba Yaga started as a menstrual health app. Our first idea was to create a period tracking app that was just a bit cooler and better than all the others. It's become now more this menstrual health app and education and community. So think of her a little bit as your fairy godmother, if you will. We're giving you science-backed cycle tracking and your daily cycle superpower, which is kind of like a hormone horoscope. And why do we do all this? And why am I giving you this class today? Because every menstruator deserves to feel empowered by their hormones and not burdened. This is our main idea behind everything we do. We try to combine as many different sources of information as we can to build something that truly empowers you with your menstrual cycle and your menstrual health. So I have another little round of questions for you guys. Can you remember back to your first period? What was that experience like? What kind of keywords or feelings pop into your head? And then the same question for how about now? How do you feel about your menstrual cycle now and your period? And maybe a third little thing, what brings you here today? What are you most interested in? As you're typing or as you're getting ready to answer this, I can tell you a little bit about my cycle story. So I had my first period at 14, and it was sort of an event in my family, but at the same time, strictly for me and my mom. Like my dad and my brother were not very interested or participative in the whole journey. Um, and then I was on the hormonal birth control pill for 14 years. So straight from my 14th birthday on, 14 years straight through, never without the pill, and tried many, many different kinds of pills, and always struggled with negative signals or negative, let's say, symptoms that I had during my cycle. Never understood that some of those might have been side effects from the pill. Never understood any of them at all in context of my menstrual cycle. So at some point in my late 20s, when I was 28, I started reading about the hormonal birth control side effects a little bit more, and I realized that some of these categories I think I could fit into, and so I decided to go off it. And that was when a whole new world opened up of heavy bleeding and terrible cramps, and all of the side effects that I thought were bad before now suddenly became even worse. So that is not usually the typical story of people going off of hormonal birth control. But in my case, this led me to really dig deep and find research and find information and find as much as I could on the topic of the menstrual cycle, just to understand why my natural cycle now was killing me slowly every month. So as you can imagine, that was a pretty strong motivator for myself to try to get myself out of that. And I can safely say now that I've become very comfortable with my menstrual cycle, and I'm incorporating it everywhere into my daily life where I can. So that journey has, thank God, after a couple of years, turned happy. So let me read what you guys are saying. Yeah, the first moment is usually a shock moment. I had that too. Yeah, the anxiety about PMS and period pain is tough. That was the same for me when I first went off of hormonal birth control, and I learned that I have really heavy periods and really heavy PMS and all of that. I always dreaded that part of the cycle. I knew, oh God, this is gonna happen again. What can I do? Am I completely hopeless, or what's happening here? So I definitely feel you on the anxiety part. Mm. Oh, that's lovely. That's a lovely story to share for the first period story. Long awaited yet unexpected and a bit scary, but proud and exciting. I love that. That sounds beautiful. Awesome. Awesome that you're mentioning that you're feeling quite at home with your cycle, and especially the mood. That's really cool because we'll also definitely dive deeper into that. So coming to learn more about the cycle is definitely what we're gonna be doing here. So cool. The question then is cycle tracking for you, or what is cycle tracking about? And a lot of people tell me, well, I can't cycle track because I have very irregular cycles, or I can't cycle track because I don't really have this 28-day long cycle, and all of these kinds of things. Some people will say, well, but I have certain conditions that make it impossible for me to cycle track, and I have all of these negative side effects and things that I have to manage, symptoms that I have to manage. Cycle tracking is just like, it's not for me. And I'm here to tell you, and science is here to tell you, that a normal cycle doesn't exist. So this this ideal sort of scenario of 28-day long cycles with 4 to 5 day long periods and ovulation exactly smack dab in the middle on day 14 is not actually that common, and is also not, even if you have a regular ish cycle, even in that case, for you, 2 cycles or 3 cycles are back to back, so to speak, are never going to be exactly the same. So even if you find your sort of regular, it can still vary. So you can still go up and down by a day from cycle to cycle. It's still possible that something happens, like a huge stress factor, a big event that you're planning, or something like that. It can still happen that from one cycle to the next, stuff changes for you, just simply how it is. So normal in that sense doesn't exist. What we do see is we get these ranges and these sort of confidence intervals, right? These ranges that doctors and healthcare providers and the menstrual health community talks about. And that range usually is anywhere between 21 and 36 days for cycle length for the entire cycle. So the time between two periods starts. Um, and that shows you how much variety there is and how much it can go up and down and how much it can change throughout your lifetime, throughout the world. Really, no two people and no two cycles are ever the same. So that is the important thing. So the other important thing that I want to say is that even if you have, like I said, a very, very, very regular cycle, and it is like clockwork every 29.5 days or something like that, then it's still not 100% cool to say that you can predict exactly what's going to happen in the next few cycles, right? Or let alone if you look down the line, when will I get my period this month, next year? Like it can always just give you a little bit of a like there's always a little bit of a room for error, let's say. And when it comes to tracking and what cycle tracking really is, it's super important to understand that it's not just about predicting your next period. So when we talk about cycle tracking, we're not just talking about estimating when my next period will start. And we're also not only talking about when are the best days for me to get pregnant if I choose to do that, but really we're talking about your entire menstrual health spectrum of symptoms, signals, and just indicators that your body is giving you. Because we're very lucky in that way that our body is sending us a lot of signals through different metrics, different things that we can track when we talk about cycle tracking that can help us see when something is going well, when something is going a little bit off, or when something is starting to, become an issue. And it's telling us really everything about our life in a way. So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about cycle tracking. The benefits of tracking are as listed here on the slide as well. They're definitely for everyone, and it's this idea of a daily mindfulness practice. So it really is about asking yourself, regardless of whether you track in an app or on paper, which we'll talk about, and I'll share more in the guidebook that I'm sending around afterwards as well, on how to track on paper. But regardless of where you and how you track, or if you do it with an Excel sheet or something like that, it's really about a quick moment of time, of mindful me time, sitting down, asking myself, how am I feeling today? Right? It's all about this connection to your body. So, what am I noticing? What's been up? You mentioned mood in the chat before. That's totally one of the elements that we're tracking when we're talking about menstrual health tracking. But there's a couple of other ones that are also super important. So, this is really just about this moment of 5 to 10 minutes mindfulness, sitting down and asking myself, how am I doing today? What's actually going on? So, you're noting down physical things, but you're also noting down emotional things, and some specific metrics that we'll look at. The second idea of why tracking is beneficial for you is the idea that we're living cyclically. We're cyclical beings. By having a menstrual cycle, we're sort of always going through this these phases that our hormones are taking us through. So we're not the same every single day. It's super important when you start tracking to understand that you're not going to be the same every single day in any of the areas that you're tracking. And that's okay. So it's this coming to terms with the idea that we are cyclical, and also finding out what that means for you uniquely. Because as mentioned, no two cycles are ever the same. There's always just, the statistical averages and the confidence intervals that we can give. And everything that happens sort of in between those limits is up to you uniquely, your body, your unique patterns, right? Your own cycle patterns. So when you start tracking, it can happen that you notice things that otherwise you wouldn't have even thought of being a pattern of a cycle in any way, that keep recurring, that keep happening around the same time of your menstrual cycle. And that's the beauty of it. And once you know those patterns and once you know those things, it becomes easier to manage your symptoms. Excuse me. So rather than fighting or sort of slapping a band-aid on once it's already too late, right? You already have the cramps, so now I need to take a painkiller, for instance. It becomes easier once you understand your unique patterns to anticipate and prepare for what's coming. Not just in the way of anxiety right before the period starts, but hopefully in the way of um, I'm prepared, I'm empowered by what I know about myself and how this will likely pan out because of my patterns, because of the things that I've observed about myself. I know what I can try next to make it better, or I know that this week I did really good stuff. I took it slow. I didn't overload my schedule. I took some naps every now and again. I can have faith, or I can hope that next week, then when the period starts, I can have maybe an easier time this time. And that is one way of managing your symptoms, right? You can anticipate and prepare a bit better. The other idea of this integration of your cyclical life is also you're not only planning your life around periods anymore. So I know I was like that, especially in the beginning of my 20s or so, when I started to plan vacations with friends and stuff like that. I would always check, is my period maybe coming in that week? I don't want to go on vacation when I'm on my period, right? I don't know if any of you have had similar experiences. But that is the thing that you're basically, it's not just about that. Cycle tracking is not just about, not planning cool stuff during your period. It's also about planning the really cool stuff during those times of your cycle where you're really excited and naturally, kind of high for it, right? You're flying, you're the superstar. It's around ovulation, your fertile days. You're usually quite high in energy, quite high in, being outgoing and all of that. So it's also about finding the best times to do all kinds of things in your life, not just not go on vacation while you're bleeding. It's also a way for you to notice when something is off. And that is really important. So once you have started tracking for a couple of months and you've noticed your patterns and you've noticed certain things that you can expect and that are normal for you, that are common for you, then it also gives you this opportunity to start to compare the cycles. So when this cycle something new pops up that you hadn't noticed before, it gives you this chance because you have this written down, whether it's in the app, sort of your health record, or whether it's on paper, your actual tracking record. You have something written down to go back to and look at and say, this wasn't here before, and now suddenly I have this symptom roughly every third week of the month. And you can start talking to your doctors and your primary healthcare providers earlier on. It also helps you just simply to have this sense of written proof in your hands when you do see a doctor about a suspicion that you have, that maybe you have endometriosis, or maybe you have PCOS or any other condition, that you start taking note of. It gives you a sense of security, I guess, when you do go talk to a doctor or a primary healthcare provider, because you can say, look, I've been tracking and this is what I've noticed, so can we please check this out now? So it's a sense of control over your own health as well. And the last thing is sort of a mix of what I mentioned before. It also gives you a chance to experiment with stuff. So once you understand that you can track your own unique patterns, your own unique cycle patterns, you're also hopefully a bit less susceptible to these sort of follow these 3-step plans to, biohack your life. You're also a bit more discerning in trying out things and monitoring how they affect you then. So if you do follow a new advice on, I don't know, for instance, seed cycling or something like this, it gives you the tool to automatically also check, did that actually have an effect? Did I actually notice anything? And again, it gives you the sense of written down proof of what you've tried actually showed up somehow in my cycle metrics, or it didn't. So this is also really important for you to really play around with your own unique cyclical life and pattern and your menstrual health. It just gives you a bit of control, I hope. So then the question is how to track, and what do we actually track? And as you can see in the picture, there's a bunch of different ways, and I've mentioned a bunch of different ways already. You can either write it down on paper, you can get these printable cycle graphs, or actually Let me show you. I have some here. So this is the example you see in the image as well. This is what it looks like when you look at the circular printable. You can print like that, or we also have the table format. I haven't filled this one out yet. But yeah, so you can print on paper. You can use these, as I mentioned, sorry, you can track on paper. You can use these printables that you can find also in the guidebook that I will send around, or you can just simply use your journal. Journal on each day. What are you noticing about yourself? How are you feeling? You know, what are the things that you notice about yourself? The other thing I mentioned that I very first started when I very first started to track my menstrual health was actually really an Excel sheet. I come from a very analytical background, so I was like, of course, I'm going to make an Excel sheet with this. So I actually did create an Excel sheet. And of course, the other option is always the health tracking apps that are out there. And of course, being the CEO of a company that is building one currently, ours is going to be really awesome for that too. But those are usually the ways that you can start tracking. And what you will need to do that is it depends on how far and how deep you want to go, especially if you want to start using the fertility awareness method as your major form of contraception. So if you want to ditch hormonal birth control or even copper IUDs and things like that, any kinds of implants and other devices, if you want to ditch all that, then you can definitely track for contraceptive purposes with the fertility awareness method. In that case, you would also need another little gadget. You would need a thermometer, and I'll tell you a bit more about what the thermometer needs to have or what's special about it. But yeah, that's usually what you need in order to get started to track. So what are we tracking? We're starting, sorry, we're starting with the menstrual health signals. In this case, you're noting down when your period starts, and the first day of full bleeding is your first cycle day. So not just spotting sort of before the actual bleed starts. We usually take the first full bleeding day as your first cycle day. And in that sense, you track anything from how much you're bleeding to the heaviness of bleeding, and also if it's really bad if you get blood clots, for instance. And then as you progress through the cycle, you'll also notice cervical mucus, and you can start tracking that. And the third thing that you would track is your basal temperature. Your basal temperature is the temperature of your resting metabolism, so that's really important. It's the temperature you take very first thing right after waking up, while you're still lying in bed, ideally. So you've gotten a full good night's worth of sleep. You didn't have a lot of alcohol the night before, because that always has an effect on our resting metabolism. And you're getting up, you're basically not getting up yet. Sorry, you have your alarm clock going and you just hit the snooze button. You're not out of bed yet. You're still, in resting mode. And that's when you take the temperature. So you pop the thermometer in, wait till it beeps, and note down, that's the important part. Write down what you're actually, the actual temperature you're having. That's a super important tip, because you think you can remember it, but I've tried that. It usually doesn't work. So make sure that you have your tracker, whatever it is, your journal or the app, or the little printable, whatever it is, with your thermometer next to the bed if you want to use the fertility awareness method and you want to track your basal temperature every day and your cervical mucus every day. Cervical mucus is just simply a hydrogel that's produced in the cells in the endometrial lining. And it is a totally normal part of your body and your bodily functions. And you can just note that down too. Every time you go to the bathroom, you can wipe right before you pee. You can wipe with a piece of toilet paper, and then you can sort of check out what's there. You always wipe front to back, of course, and you just check and see what it looks like, what it feels like, what consistency it has. And while you're wiping, you usually also notice sort of how much there is, right? If you feel super, super, super lots of mucus, then that's usually also something to note down when you start tracking. Other things that you're tracking when we're talking about our cycle tracking yeah, when we talk about cycle tracking, is any kind of physical symptoms that you're feeling. And this could include headaches or bloating or diarrhea, constipation, acne, nausea, back pain, tenderness anywhere. So, really anything where your body's going, I have something, right? Really anything that's happening in your body is usually a sign of something that you want to note down. The same goes for your physical activity. So, this also includes how much you moved in a day. So, for instance, did you do some yoga, or did you go for a walk, or did you do weightlifting, or what kind of movement did you do? What kind of physical activity did you do? So you can always also note that down. Emotional signs and mental well-being is another category of what you might want to start tracking. And here we're obviously talking about your mood. How are you feeling every day? Um, did something awesome happen or not so much? Did something happen that sort of pulled you down? So that's really important. You can note those down. You can use little smileys to indicate whatever feels more natural or easier for you. Nutritional information and cravings. So what I mean by nutritional information is you don't have to count calories, and you don't have to write down exactly, your macros that you ate that day and stuff like that. That's not what I mean by that. What I mean is more, what kind of food cravings do you get? Or what did you eat that was super special or that was super weird that day? Like you suddenly had a craving for salty snacks. So, you made yourself some salty popcorn. So write down sort of specific appetites that you have. Also, write down when you notice that you're not feeling so hungry in a day, because how hungry you are or how hungry you feel can also be an indicator of where in your cycle you're at, and can also be correlated with where in your cycle you're at. So it's really not about creating any kind of pressure around food at all. It's just the observing of it, right? What am I craving? What am I eating? Not in order to judge. That's the key thing. Just to figure out, okay, this might be right, somehow correlated with where I'm at in my cycle. I'm gonna note that down because it's super weird that I get this odd, like people always make fun of pregnancy cravings, right? But it can happen during your regular menstrual cycle without being pregnant too. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, and to try to understand. Which is why we track it as well. And then the same goes for your energy and sleep quality. So definitely check in with your energetic body as well, not just your physical and your emotional or mental well-being, but that also your energy levels. How are you feeling? How dynamic? How fit are you? And also how tired do you maybe feel? And how much did you sleep? How much did you actually get good quality sleep last night? And again, here I'm not talking about these fancy sleep trackers that you can have, on your wrist or on your phone. I'm really just talking about your felt experience. Um, Tracking your menstrual health is, with exception of the basal temperature where it needs to be super, specific. But in the other things, it's really about how are you feeling? What is your body telling you? So you don't need to make this a super uber science. I got lost in that, like I said in the beginning, when I started tracking in an Excel sheet. I really got lost in it. I like noted down every, down to the minute how much sleep I got and all of that. And I tried to make it a race every month to get a bit more sleep. So that, of course, totally negates the whole mindfulness idea of it. So if you want to use it also just to practice some mindfulness with yourself, then stick to how you're feeling, just simply, and note it down in those categories. Please, guys, let me know if there are any questions at any point in time. Pop them in the chat. I actually have the chat open so I can see. And yeah, don't be shy. Let me know if there's anything you have a question about. So let's get to know the menstrual cycle. I know we probably all had some form of this in school back when we were younger. I know that a lot of this I didn't learn in school. So let's just rehash quickly. The hormones. What are the main hormones that are at play in our menstrual cycle? Usually we're talking about 4 hormones. We're talking about progesterone, estrogen, FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which is the luteinizing hormone. And these four play sort of together, and as you can see, create these crazy, chaotic looking graphs. And this is one cycle length. So if we look at on the left where menstruation begins, this would be your cycle day one, and it goes all the way to whatever, let's say 29 days in this case, 29-day cycle length. This is what your hormones are doing in these 29 days. So to say that we're not linear is kind of an understatement if you look at a graph like this, because a lot is going on here. We usually categorize the cycle in two halves or in two parts, the first part being the follicular phase and the second part being the luteal phase. The luteal phase is kicked off by the ovulation. Ovulation is in this little graph indicated by the golden star. So I usually then break it down further into the actual menstruation week or menstruation days, the time before ovulation, which I call the pre-ovulation phase, and then the time right after, which is the post-ovulation phase, and then the last phase of the cycle or week-ish, depending on how long your cycle is, of course, but roughly a week, is the pre-menstruation phase then, so the time right before the next period starts. This is also the language I use when we talk about each phase's sort of characteristics later on. It's what I use in the app as well in developing the app, so it's sort of consistent everywhere. When we're only looking at progesterone and estrogen, it doesn't look quite so crazy anymore. And I like this graph a lot because, so I'm only isolating those two hormones. I like this a lot because they're sort of also telling us what's happening with our two most important fertility awareness metrics to track, our cervical mucus and our basal body temperature. So the cervical mucus is sort of influenced by estrogen, which is the yellow line here. So you can see right before ovulation, we're peaking. So you can kind of correlate those two and you can say, well, we have peak cervical mucus when estrogen is peaking. And it's possible, depending on your estrogen sensitivity, to have a bit more mucus again in the luteal phase. The other thing, basal body temperature, is correlated with progesterone, which we see here. It's sort of low in the first half of the cycle, and then it rises higher in the second half of the cycle. And this is usually also what we're looking at when we're tracking basal body temperature. We're looking for the shift from lower temperatures to higher temperatures in order to figure out when ovulation might have occurred. The uterine lining graph is usually one that we do get in school. I remember talking about this specifically. So when we are, an egg is not fertilized in our last cycle, then what happens at the beginning of our new cycle, when we start our period, we're shedding the uterine lining. So we're shedding what wasn't needed because we didn't get pregnant, right? So this is what we see here. It's sort of, falls, it's shedding. And then as we progress through the cycle, it's building up again. So right around ovulation, when our body is gearing up to, get ready and to, have a fertilized egg and to implant that, we're building up uterine lining. And then once we realize, sort of towards the end of the cycle, once our body realizes, oops, nothing happened this time again, sort of it's getting ready to be shed again. So this is this graph that we learned in school, and I remember learning this in school as well, and I thought, I don't know what to do with this. And so it's really interesting that as I got older, I realized that there's other factors in my menstrual cycle that are actually much more important for our day-to-day lives. This is one of those graphs that sort of displays how, when we start tracking, how most of the tracking apps out there, and how also you in your Excel sheet, this is actually taken from one of my Excel sheets from the past, how if you use an Excel sheet also, you can depict, in this case, the basal body temperature, this green line, and your cervical mucus. So I indicated this on this graph here for the presentation with the little icons. So what you see is we have a 29-day cycle, and we're starting on day one with the first day of, here, let me move there actually, with the first day of your period bleeding. I've indicated how heavy my periods are. So I have a very heavy day on day two, and then it gets slightly better again towards the end. And in this case, it was a 5-day cycle. And then as we progress, day 6, 7, and 8 here, I put little clouds. Clouds indicate dryness. So I had no cervical fluid present. I couldn't observe anything on those days. And that changed then on day 9. I started seeing some creamy cervical mucus, and this lasted for a couple of days, and then this creamy mucus turned kind of watery, so almost see-through. Creamy really is like face cream, so it's not really see-through, it's kind of thick. It's not really stretchy. It's kind of blobby, if you want. And then so that changed to watery, and that became very clear, and I could hardly pick it up. Like, it wasn't very stretchy or anything like that. It was really more like water droplets, so it was quite fluid. Excuse me. And then there's a day in there, day 14, where I have sort of an egg white consistency or jelly-like consistency. So this is what we're talking about, peak cervical mucus, when it's clear and watery or clear and jelly-like. So it's actually quite stretchy, like you could pick it up with your fingers, and you could, it would be stretchy between your fingers. So these few days 13, 14, and 15, I would have said, okay, this is peak cervical mucus. I'm guessing that I'm gonna be ovulating soon, or am ovulating right now. But only looking at mucus is just one indicator. The second indicator I took in order to confirm that my suspicion that I was ovulating there is the temperature. So I've been tracking my temperature every day, and it's sort of, floating around similar temperatures there in the first half of the cycle. And then I noticed on day 15 a sudden drop. Cool. So day 15, I was already sure that I'm around ovulation because of my peak cervical mucus being present. So I typed into my phone, or in this case, actually the Excel sheet, I typed in this, sudden temperature drop. And that alone wouldn't have been enough for me to confirm ovulation. So I waited 3 more days to see if I then see the rise in temperature that is needed for me to confirm. So I waited for day 16, and I still noted down my mucus, of course, and day 17 and day 18. And even though days 17 and 18, I'd already seen no more mucus present and I was dry, I still waited those days to check the temperature, and the temperature remained quite high. So as you can see, let me try and put the mouse there. So as you can see, we have the sudden increase here from day 15 to 16, and then we're staying high for the next 2 to 3 days. And then it remains high, right, for the rest of the cycle. But on day 18, then I was pretty certain that ovulation had occurred. And at the time, I didn't want to get pregnant. So I started then, not needing extra protection anymore. From day 19 on, I felt safe enough to not continue on with extra protection. This is just a little introduction into what all goes into using the fertility awareness method. This course is in no way trying to teach the fertility awareness method as a whole. It's just gives you an indication of what to look for, and gives you a little bit more of an introduction, I would say, into this is what's possible. So understanding your body and getting to know yourself to this level is like super useful. And for me, it was the most empowering thing ever, because if I just stick to this, 5 to 10 minutes of tracking and understanding myself every day, I always know where I'm at in my cycle, and that's really cool. So are there any questions about this at the moment? While I take a sip. Cool. Okay. So talking about the phases, as I mentioned already, I'm talking in this context always about the menstrual phase, the pre-ovulation phase, the post-ovulation phase, and the pre-menstruation phase. Let me check the chat. I just saw there's something in there. How do you know for sure when the luteal phase starts? So the for sure part is the difficult part here. Let me try to go back again. Exactly. So in this case, I was pretty sure that I had ovulated on day 15 because of the temperature indicator, and because I had peak cervical mucus for these days. On day 14, when it was the 14th day, I looked at my mucus and I thought, oh, I must be ovulating today. But then I checked my phone again and I saw that, my Excel sheet again, and I saw that my temperature hadn't actually dropped that significantly. So I couldn't be sure yet. Day 15, I do see the temperature drop, but I still can't be sure yet because I don't know if maybe it drops even some more the next day. And I don't know if it'll go up, if it'll go down again, or if it'll stay up, right? So this is why when it comes to fertility awareness, it's really important to get a dedicated class or a coach or, your doctor or someone to really teach you the details, because generally speaking, while yes, it's true that we're only fertile on one day of the cycle of our menstrual cycle, which is ovulation day, we have to take into account how long sperm can survive in the vagina, which is up to 5 or 6 days. And so that already creates a window of time that we have to be careful. And then you add into that exactly this confidence sort of that I call confidence interval, right? So after I think I had my ovulation and after I think the luteal phase begins, so in this case, the luteal phase begins on day 16 for me. After I think it's that, I still add a couple days, in this case, 3 days, just to make sure that my temperature actually remains high for 3 consecutive days after the first drop. And then also beforehand, so it's of course when you're in the cycle, right? Let's say I'm on day 7 or 8, I can't know when my ovulation will occur, right? On day 7, I didn't yet know that I will ovulate on day 15, for instance. So I have to observe my mucus in this case. When I'm going through it, right? When I'm living it, I have to observe my mucus. And whenever I find mucus at all, so when mucus is present prior to what I then think is my ovulation. So day 9, I saw mucus. I was like, oops, it's a careful day, right? So I immediately started using protection on top of just tracking, because in this case I didn't want to get pregnant, so I had to protect against that. So I needed to use condoms and be really safe ish. So this is the important thing. Whenever there's mucus present, so there is no such thing as fertile mucus and non-fertile mucus in general. All mucus is a sign of you could get ready. It could happen now. So that's the important thing here, is when you're still in the first half of your cycle, so when you haven't felt the temperature drop yet, when you haven't had, let's say, the super peak mucus yet, and when you haven't been able to confirm ovulation yet. So all these 3 things need to work together. So if you're before that, in the time before that, in your follicular phase, any mucus you get is a sign of, you could potentially be fertile already. So avoid penetrative sex during that time if it's unprotected, or use mechanical protection on top of that. So again, you can usually only after the fact confirm that ovulation has occurred, and by inference, you can only after the fact confirm that the luteal phase has started. Did that answer your question? Yeah, so watery and egg white, since they're both considered peak mucus, it's usually just a consistency thing. Watery is kind of like it's droplets. It's like water, right? It's very fluid, and it just drops right off. So if I tried to pick it up off the toilet paper after I wiped, if I tried to pick it off with my fingers, I couldn't even catch it, so to speak, right? I couldn't even keep it in my hands, and I couldn't even play with it. Let's say, like, I couldn't see if it was stretchy between my fingers. That would be the egg white or the jelly-like consistency, where I can actually, take some off the toilet paper and sort of spread it around my fingers, and it would stretch between my fingers. That would be the difference there, between watery and egg white mucus. But since both are clear in color, they're both considered the very peak mucus. So both of those are already signs. When those are present, they're signs of, okay, keep an eye out and be really extra careful to take your temperature at the right time. Keep an eye out to make sure that you might be ovulating right now, you might be fertile. And like I say, any mucus, including the creamy and even sticky mucus, if it happens in the first half of your cycle before you're sure that you can confirm ovulation, it's a sign of fertility. So it's a sign of you needing to be careful or you needing to try harder, depending on whether you want to avoid pregnancy or get pregnant. Um, so that would be my learnings from the past few years. Cool. Let's continue on. Yeah. So looking at the phases, there's many different ways of looking at the phases. So what we've gotten so far is an introduction into the actual science of it all. And what we're then adding in, and what has happened also in my personal experience over time, sort of spirituality kicked in, neo esoteric sort of kicked in, and came up with these other ideas of describing the cycle phases. Some people talk about winter, spring, summer, and fall. Other people talk about the archetypes that you go through, the maiden, mother, and the crone. And again, others talk about the moon phase correlations. And the only one that really stuck out to me is super interesting because I started observing those in myself is actually the moon phase correlations, which I do not mean at all that we all have to cycle in conjunction or with the moon. That is not true. Not all of us cycle with the moon. But what I started finding out over time is that we do see these sort of similar events and phases in our cycle. So this is why I overlaid it here with what the moon looks like, what the moon goes through, like which kind of phases the moon goes through, and how that fits with our cycle as well. We see around ovulation, it's kind of like our inner full moon, you could say. And around the dark time, right before menstruation starts and when menstruation has started, this is like the phase of the moon that you can't see the moon in the sky because it's so dark, it's on the other side kind of. So you're in this dark moon, new moon phase. And then the times in between from new moon to full moon, you're sort of slowly, everything is rising and awakening, right? We'll talk about what each phase, how you can characterize each phase in a minute as well. But I like this inner moon phase idea. I like this, we're waxing, right? We're slowly growing fuller in confidence and in energy and in all of these things between menstruation and our ovulation. And then that peaks around ovulation, our full moon phase, and then it wanes again, it goes down, and we're slowly becoming more introspective again, and everything is sort of decreasing. We have less energy, we're a bit more sleepy generally towards then the next cycle start again towards the next menstruation. So the key of cycle tracking, once again, is to not fall, I don't want to say victim, but you know what I mean? Like to not fall for these oversimplifications that are out there and say, oh, okay, it's my winter. I'm supposed to be super quiet and like toned down and in myself. But what if that's just not how you feel? What if actually during your menstrual phase you feel super awesome and you don't have any of the negative side effects? And you just want to go out and explore the world already because you're very sensitive to the slowly but rising estrogen. Then winter kind of doesn't seem right for you, right? Or what if, around ovulation, you actually feel some discomfort and you have some negative side effects, and you feel things that don't make you want to go out and party hard? Then the summer idea is not 100% for you. So I'm giving you all of these options here of how you can categorize each cycle phase for you to find your own, for you to find sort of what best works for you and what you can find in your own body and in your own cycle. I'm just going forward with the moon one, the inner moon phases, because it's just the combination of what science found in a lot of really cool studies, all individual studies, but what we found is certain effects can be seen in each of these phases that seem similar to what the moon is going through, right? From being, very dark to growing full to going very dark again and so on. So this is the one that I'm focusing on right now, is sort of like this inner moon correlation. But definitely I invite you and I beg you when you start tracking, to look for your own ways to describe what each cycle phase means to you. If none of these speak to you, that's also perfectly fine. Come up with your own versions. Come up with your own characterizations. Maybe it's even personas of yourself that you're portraying into the world, right? It could be that during your ovulation days, or your fertile days, you're super extravagant and outgoing, and that's a different persona, than when you're on your period. So play around also with reframing whole experience with your menstrual cycle, I guess. That's the invitation here. The invitation is to start seeing your menstrual cycle as more than just a body function, and something that is there and you kind of have to deal with it. The invitation is to get playful with it and to understand yourself with it and in it. I hope that makes sense. And I hope I'm not offending anyone. Um, so this is a nice little graphic that I put together, which you will, I think, also find in the workbook that I'm in the guidebook that I'm sending around afterwards. And it's sort of like shows you the cycle in an actual cycle format, because so far we've only looked at graphs and linear representations, right? So this is the actual cycle graph, and we see the start at the bottom. Let me point my mouse right there. So actually right here, this is the first red day, it's the first menstruation day. And then you go around clockwise, and this is what your cycle would look like. And I've overlaid all the other ways of characterizing the menstrual cycle. In this case, the moon phases, and then also the one that I mentioned before with the seasons, the year seasons, the winter, spring, summer, fall. You can kind of also put them on there. And when we're talking about now the next couple of minutes, when we're talking about describing what each phase looks like, these are sort of like the keywords that go with it. So the whole dark phase, the premenstrual and then menstruation phase, sort of is this idea of a fresh start. It's like an inner rebirth, right? From everything that's happening inside our bodies, but also from how we're feeling. A rebirth is a little bit bloody. It's not always comfortable. Birth in general is not necessarily a comfortable experience. So you can really see it quite literally as a rebirth. So yes, you're starting fresh, but that doesn't mean you have to feel fresh yet. Right? It's coming out of it's sort of coming out of this bloody newness, so to speak. And then as you move up towards your peak moment, which is the inner full moon or your ovulation, fertile time. As you're moving up, you're starting to become more and more active, and you're starting to attract abundance and things into your life. Everything's becoming more somehow, it seems. So everything is on the rise. And then at the peak, you get to celebrate what's happening. And then as you come off the peak again, you're dropping into this sort of completion and surrender mode. So you're on, in general, becoming a bit more quieter, less outgoing, and you're also becoming like you're getting into this I want to get things done mindset, right? You have to maybe clean the apartment suddenly, kind of erratically or crazily, or you really need to get all of your last to-dos done in the project that you're working on. So this is where you're going into this completion and surrender, and you're starting to let stuff go, and you're not adding new things onto your to-do list, but rather you're completing things, you're ending things in order to then be reborn, or to start fresh again with the next cycle, with the next update. So this is one way of looking at your menstrual cycle as well, and how to utilize it for your everyday life. This is the part that really changed everything for me, especially in starting this business and starting other businesses on the side as well. Once I started living by my patterns, which happened to coincide also with the ones that sort of science found out over time. Once I started living by these patterns and by what each phase gives me in terms of strengths and weaknesses, everything changed. I just became that much more productive, because I started to realize for myself that during this phase, actually, where I go from my rebirth into my full moon phase, so where I'm in this action and abundance, this manifesting and growing and going and really getting it all done, is crazy. I can put so much work out there, and then I'm peaking, and everything seems to be just happening by itself. And then stuff gets harder again as I fall down sort of the other side of the circle. Things get more difficult again, or a bit more tedious, and that's when I know, okay, I need to take it slower. Actually, this is actually the time of my the phase of my cycle where I just need to finish off what's on my to-do list, but not add new projects on necessarily. Or maybe I shouldn't be hosting the 20 people dinner party on my day 26 when I'm just not feeling up for it, right? So this is really how it changed the game for me in all the things that I do in terms of business and everything else. Oh my God, there's a really good question in the chat that I want to that I want to pop in. How to find this balance in a male-driven industry, working a corporate job with deadlines, which I have no control over. That one is huge, and this is kind of the whole point of why I feel like our menstrual cycles are here to empower us. Um, One thing has to do with boundary setting, and the other thing has to do with learning to accept and prepare and anticipate. So it depends on where you're at, of course. I'm, self-employed, so I can say everything changes if I just, go with the flow. That's super easy for me to say. I've also been in a corporate position before I started going with the flow, so I totally feel that. I sometimes also did not have control over the deadlines that were being set and the, things that were expected of me on a week-to-week basis. I was always lucky to have at least one team lead that I had a good connection with, that I could share certain things with. I never went into detail about my menstrual cycle with them, of course. This is totally, totally not okay. And this is a hard boundary for me. And it's also important to keep that part private in a way, if that feels true for you. But what you can do is you can let people know in advance, and especially if you have a team or a team lead around you, that you trust with that kind of information. Look, next week I know it's going to be a low energy week. I can't commit to all 20 of the pieces of output that you expect from me. I can only commit to 10. But I also know that the week after that is going to be double in energy and everything else. So here, how about this? We'll meet again after the next after next week is over, and then we'll pile on some more projects because I'll be ready to tackle them and I can really deliver. So that is one way. If you're lucky enough to have a team lead or the manager, and also the team to support you in that, of course, around you, that accept that, that is one way that you can set a boundary, and you can communicate openly what you're capable and what you're not capable of handling and delivering upon, without having to go into the detail of saying, well, it's because I'm going to be PMSing. We don't need to further those kinds of rhetorics and those kinds of messages out in the world. um, but it can definitely help for you to start to rephrase in however professional it needs to be, like how corporate we're talking, right? You can definitely see it as an invitation for yourself also to set proper boundaries. So that's one way. Um, and then depending on if you have a really open work environment and you're in like the super startup, whatever environment, it could also be that it's totally acceptable for you to have a blocker in your calendar and let people know, don't talk to me today or this week, unless you have an appointment, because I'm irritable. So if you have a very loose working environment, then that's cool. But usually in the more professional, linear, male driven industries, that's one way of where the preparation comes in, right? So this whole anticipation part comes in. I know this is what my cycle phases are like. I know that phase 3, roughly week 3, is just not a cool week. I can let my boss know without having to go into detail and without making it a laughable topic, right? Oh, she's PMSing again. Like I said, we really don't want that. So that's super important. And I think what we've been seeing now is where in certain places of the world we're talking about menstrual leave and these things. It's slowly but surely becoming a bit more acceptable to also just simply take a sick day if you're not up for stuff. um, and so that's super important to also make use of that. I would suggest personally. I don't have a full set of arguments prepared for that for that, of course, to argue each side. But I would personally, probably, if I was in a corporate position still, I would probably, now that I've become more, let's say, more comfortable with my menstrual cycle, I would probably make more use of that. Than I did when I was younger. I never understood why I would take a day off from my period. I would just pop painkillers and keep going, right? But especially on heavy bleed days, I now know that no amount of iron in the world is gonna make me make me run a marathon or something like that. So I know to take it slow. And this is where I guess again it's the same tip. It's the whole boundary setting tip. This is where this becomes very, very, very important. So cool question. Thank you. All right, let's look at each phase. I think you see by the graphic that I added in the background, by the image that I added in the background, the menstruation phase is your inner new moon. It's a fresh start of sorts. It's a rebirth of sorts. And as mentioned, the rebirth can be bloody, is bloody, just simply by definition. So this is what you can think of it like. Um, it's a great time to dream and manifest new things into being. And what I mean by that is that it could be that mood wise, you're still starting out slow, energy wise, you're still starting out slow. You're not 100% yet because, especially during the week prior to menstruation, it's usually based on hormones that you don't sleep so well. So you're feeling generally tired and meh, and you're still coming off of feeling bloated maybe from the week before your period. So generally, this phase, this menstruation phase, days 1 and 2, start super sluggish and just not cool. Um, and this is due to all of your hormones. If you remember the hormone curves that we looked at the beginning, all of your hormones are starting at their lowest point of the cycle on the first few days. Um, the whole energy and not feeling so great can also be due to iron levels being low. So that is super important to keep in mind when you're starting to notice that, it's just generally speaking, you don't have cramps or you don't have super heavy bleeding, but somehow you still feel in the first 1 or 2 days and your energy is just not up. So it's definitely interesting, or it could be a thing to look at your iron levels always. And yeah, what else can we say about the beginning? We can say that, cramps, of course, can happen. The same goes for pain sensitivity in general. So because your estrogen starts low, you do have higher pain sensitivity. This is also true for the pre-menstruation week, so the week prior to menstruation. Generally, I would not schedule a waxing appointment during this time. It's just simply true that everything hurts a bit more intensely during this time. And so, as I mentioned, because we're starting out kind of sluggish at the beginning of this phase, this is why we call this the dream and manifest phase, because you're not yet into the doing so much, but you're definitely, feeling the fresh start, right? Maybe you're dreaming better and you have crazy dreams, and maybe you have all these ideas and you want to start new stuff and you have a million ideas at the beginning of your menstruation. You start getting dreams for new projects and cool new side hustles and whatever. So this is usually a dreamy phase. And if that happens for you, that's cool. Write it all down, journal about it, make plans, make lists, do all of that. This is what we mean by dream and manifest. That's a great time to dream big, think big, or plan ahead. It's not necessarily the doing yet that is super important in this phase. And that is just simply due to, for the most part, energy levels being kind of on the lower end, especially in the beginning. And then if you add to that, as mentioned, cramping and really heavy bleeding, you get all kinds of other issues that make you not start out as fresh. So if you're one to cocoon during the first few days of your period, if you want to stay close to home and chill on the couch and stuff like that, work from home also in that time, then it's great to use this time to make plans, to dream, and to write it all down. um, what else can we say? When it comes to movement and sports, there's a bunch of studies that found that generally the first half of your cycle is really, really good for muscle building. So it's really conducive of you building strong muscle because you can recover faster due to the estrogen that is rising. And then the second half of the cycle is usually better for weight. I think weight, sorry, let me double check so I don't tell. Is usually better for fat loss. Exactly, that was that one. So in terms of hormones, but this is just, maybe I should give that disclaimer right away when it comes to the studies that I've used and looked at in order to compile all of this. Most of these studies are individual studies that looked at each study looked at their own individual population and found correlations and stuff like that. I have not yet found meta-analysis that group together all such studies to find real underlying correlations and to figure out if they're true or consistent across all the different populations. So that's really important to keep in mind. In a way, this is an anecdotal compilation of studies that I found. And it just happened so that It was true for my personal case, but also for the case of people that I've worked with over the past years. So definitely, once again, my invitation: track your cycle, note down what you can find out about each phase for yourself, and the patterns that you find in each phase for yourself. And as I said before, give them your own names if you feel like it. So movement and sports, I mentioned that. So technically, muscle building is great in the first half of your cycle. This would include menstruation, especially if you're already an athlete and you're already doing new stuff, doing heavy lifting, for instance, or heavy intensity workouts. However, especially again because of the negative side effects such as cramping or heavy bleeding and iron deficiency that goes with that, and the pain sensitivity, which is heightened, it's not the best week of your cycle to start completely fresh, like to start a completely new sports routine, or to start, from scratch with a weight loss program or something like that. So the first week can be really good if you're already an athlete, but it's definitely not great if you're wanting to start something from scratch, if you're wanting to start something new. So that's important to mention. And if you need to, because you're not feeling up to it, incorporate some slow movement as well, a little bit of yoga, maybe just a walk out in nature with some fresh air. That can usually do wonders also, especially if you're not feeling very well. um, Generally speaking, during the course of this phase, as we move towards then the next phase also and out of the actual bleeding phase, estrogen that's rising helps to dampen your appetite a little bit. So if you've had crazy cravings the week before, you'll notice them suddenly sort of go down a bit, or maybe even a lot. You will still probably like your comfort foods during your period and the heavy days especially, but generally speaking, you're becoming much more curious also about new stuff to try and new foods to try. And the same goes for your social life and romance, kind of. Everything is still sort of slow because we're starting off slow, and you don't really have a lot of interest in going out much or being very social, or if you're dating, looking, scheduling all those dates in that first week during menstruation. That's usually not when you want to do it. And that in and of itself is already a sign from your body that you can totally respect. Right? No one is forcing you to do anything on your period. It's totally up to you. The the thing about tracking is that you can find, even if it's just one or two little things that are positive about this time, you can find, and over time you will find more things. You can find things that are great about this time too, that you can look forward to, and that help you reframe this, because the story that we have, some of us have good stories about their first menstruation, but a lot of us unfortunately don't. So we still somehow carry this with us, right? We still carry a little bit of shame with us. We still carry a little bit of eh, discomfort and all of that, even if it's just psychological discomfort. So just tracking and seeing what we can look forward to during the menstrual phase is already also a cool step towards this empowerment that I mentioned, towards saying, oh, okay, this is actually just a part of me like everything else. I get to look forward to it, or I get to have fun with it. Then we're moving into the pre-ovulation phase, which is the inner waxing moon. This action and abundance are the keywords that I've noted down for that. And it's this image already says it all: make it happen. So we've started out with the dreaming and the manifesting and the making the plans in all areas of our life, right? Including our social life. We didn't feel like meeting friends yet, but we wanted to make plans to meet friends yet already. Same goes for dating. We didn't really feel like dating right that day, but we felt like, okay, let's maybe schedule a date for next week. And this is next week. So now we're here. This phase is super, super cool because we're getting into the doing mode. We're really, starting to get more active. Estrogen is rising and peaking during this phase. And what's important to know is, sometimes I say week, this phase can vary in length. So if you have a very long cycle, or if you have very irregular cycles, or something like PCOS, for instance, a condition like PCOS, then that would mean that you ovulate later in your cycle than what they say is, normal, whatever. I mentioned the thing about normal beforehand, but so you ovulate a bit later. So this phase is the one that sort of gets longer due to that. So I made it green because it's awesome for most people. Um, it just feels really good. Everything is rising and peaking. Um, your pain sensitivity is going down. You will find mucus present. Overall, your mood is probably pretty excellent. You can't complain about much. You have a lot of passion. And I don't only mean romantic passion, you have a lot of passion for projects and ideas and your purpose and these things. So you'll also notice that you get very energetic about stuff. You'll get this sort of magnetic vibe to you. People will start to, buy into your ideas better. So this is also super useful if you're in a sales or a biz dev position or something like that, or you have to do your own sales and business development. Then this is a great time for that. You somehow become just more attractive, and not only in a romantic sense. Everything you say is sort of sounds nicer. There's studies that found that your tonation changes in the time before and around ovulation. So this is really this peak phase. This is really the ramp up to the peak phase, let's say, where you really get going. Same goes for sports. You are really feeling great. All the workouts seem to go super easily compared to just 1 or 2 weeks before. Everything just seems to flow. So you're really in this flow state. You're the most outgoing, or you're getting to be the most outgoing that you usually are in your cycle. You're going to want to go out and make connections, meet new people. Dress to impress is a thing, right? So that is all sort of happening in this really cool phase. And it can be a bit longer than a week, depending on how long your cycle length is. So we get more of the goodness, which is awesome. And then this, of course, is peaked by the celebration moment, your fertile days, your ovulation, your inner full moon. So really everything is, you're at the top. You're basically, you're exuding main character energy, let's say. So you're super spontaneous and adventurous, much more fun. You notice your peak mucus is present. You'll notice that temperature drop, which is then later followed by an increase. And really everything, your estrogen and your testosterone are peaking on your ovulation or around your ovulation. So that means you're feeling super sexual, you're sensual, you're feeling much more, again, outgoing. You just want to meet people, hang around with people. So you can really use this phase, your ovulation phase and your ovulation or fertile days. You can really use these days for yourself to really enjoy. So schedule that huge party, invite all the people, or do the thing that usually would scare you. That's also a good way of looking at it. Do the thing that would scare you on other days of your cycle. Like schedule that salary negotiation with your team lead or something like that. This is usually a good time to have that really big project due, or this is a good time to you know present that huge thesis that you've been working on for months and months and months. So these are really these great, great, great days to be in your power, as they say. Main character energy, kind of for this one. What's super important to note here, I know we're coming up towards the end of this, but what's super important to note here is that if you do not feel super awesome during this phase, this leading up to a phase, the pre-ovulation phase and the fertile days, then this can be due to a sensitivity in your case that is higher to estrogen, because estrogen is the ruler of this phase, right? Because it's rising and peaking during pre-ovulation and ovulation. If you feel sort of anxiety or stress during this time, that can totally be due to a higher sensitivity to estrogen that you have. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have higher estrogen, right? It just means that everyone reacts to our hormones different, and it could be that you just show a higher sensitivity to estrogen in this case. Unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about that. It's just really, again, where tracking comes in handy, because if you know that these are not going to be super awesome days, you can, plan ahead and prepare a little bit. But from what I could find, that is quite uncommon. So I hope of you guys, there's no one in here in this class that is dealing with this. But if you are, then that also means that as soon as estrogen drops again, which is the second half of the cycle, and because you're sensitive to estrogen, that then you'll start feeling better when most people don't feel so good. You'll start feeling better. So also here is where this, cyclical nature comes in handy again. It gives you this trust that even though you're either at a high, you'll know a low is coming again, or vice versa. If you're on a low, you know that better times are coming again because I'm cyclical. I'm cyclical. I will go up again. So that's really, really important to note here. All right. So ovulation has passed. We're starting into our luteal phase. It starts with this in between phase, the post ovulation, as I call it, or your inner waning moon. And this is the great time, which is why I put all the to dos on the board. This is a great time to complete stuff and to let go of things. So it really has to do with get it done, right? This is where you look at your to do list and you feel like, boom, let's tackle it all. Let's, make it all happen. Let's finish it all off. But this is not the time to add things to your to do list. So that's super important. So again, if these kinds of things, like deadlines or to-dos are out of your control, then make sure to communicate your boundaries very strictly during this phase already, to prepare people around you for, wait, there's times of the month or there's times of whenever, you don't even need to let them know that it's that time of the month, right? But there's times where you just can't commit to too much. You can definitely commit to getting done though. So this is the key. Getting stuff done is kind of like your superpower in this entire phase. Estrogen is plunging and then peaking again a second time during your cycle. It's peaking again towards the end of this phase, the post ovulation phase. And overall progesterone is rising and peaking towards the next phase. So this means that your mucus is becoming less or drying up completely, which would be healthy. Your temperature is remaining higher now. So overall, we can say in the second half of the cycle, your temperature is higher than the first half of the cycle. This is also a moment, though, to start recognizing if there's any negativity coming in. So by that, I mean not just a downshift in mood, you're generally mellowing out a little bit, but also negative effects such as PMS can start again, can start already with early signs, or PMDD. So if you're suffering from the very severe version of PMS, then that can definitely be your alert time. Okay, I've confirmed ovulation. I'm entering into the luteal phase. I'm entering into post ovulation. I should stay on the lookout for any PMDD symptoms that are popping up now. Water retention, bloatedness, tender breasts, all of this can happen already now. Why are we feeling this downshift a little bit? Why is everything sort of starting to go down? It's because of this withdrawal. So we've had high hormone phases right before, leading up to ovulation and ovulation, and then they're all plunging at first. So this means that we're getting this sort of withdrawal effect. So it's similar to when you're used to drinking a lot of coffee, and then you take the coffee away, suddenly everything is out of whack. So this is kind of why it's initially feeling worse than it is. So usually what I've also noticed for myself and what I've noticed with other people that I've talked to is that the first and second day right after ovulation, they feel really bad, like really shitty about themselves, but then it rises again, and then they sort of get used to this withdrawal, right? They get used to those hormones being missing from their system, and then it picks up again. And this is where this completion and getting it done attitude comes in. So even though overall you feel a little slower and maybe a brain fog is coming in already, you definitely notice that your concentration is on point. So you might not be able to memorize a lot of cool new things, but you'll be able to get stuff done much more focused. And you'll have this flow state of just digging down and getting it done, definitely easier when it comes to work and careers and stuff like that. Appetite wise, of course, there's this little alert that says careful, hangry. So if you do feel irritable during this phase, this is a heads up that is super useful, and it was super useful for me as well. If you do feel a sudden mood change or something, it could be because you need a snack. So go ahead and have a snack, whether that's the healthy option or the non-healthy option, whatever that is. Choose whatever feels good in that moment. Have a snack and then see if you still feel shitty. um, I don't mean emotional overeating here. It's simply what I mean is when we have these first pangs of mood changes happening already during this phase, it's usually because what our body is telling us also is that we need to eat a bit more frequently. So it doesn't have to be more food necessarily. It just needs to happen a bit more often in the day. So every, I don't know, hour or so, have a little snack. Every 1.5 hours, have a little snack. That's something that really helped me. And at the same time, what we can start doing is take little naps, take little power naps. The power napping will definitely become interesting then in the pre-menstruation phase. So this phase right before your next period starts, your inner dark moon. This is really where we're talking about self-care and surrender, resting and reflecting. Everything about your hormones is sort of giving you this sedating effect. The progesterone, which is peaking and staying quite high before it drops towards the end of this phase, has this very high sedating effect on you. Estrogen is plunging the second time for good now in this cycle, so you're definitely not feeling super peppy or super awake or super energetic. This is where slow movement comes in handy. Things that you do like breath work, meditation, yoga, getting fresh air, taking a walk. These things are can definitely help lift your mood a little bit. But overall, all the negative stuff comes in for a lot of people. So PMS, of course, water retention, bloatedness, tender breasts. If you have chronic health conditions, those can flare up now and all the way into your period. The same goes for if you're battling OCD or anxiety or depression or things like this. Those can definitely be exacerbated just due to your hormones during your premenstrual phase as well. You can get colder faster, so always carry a jacket with you. Um, and yeah, the mood changes, of course, and especially the doubt and the worry and the pessimism are creeping in. So when you notice that, also notice maybe that you're getting overall more critical, which could be terrible for your friendships or partnerships. You definitely also don't necessarily feel like dating new people in this time. You're kind of in this evaluation phase of everyone around you is starting to annoy you. Let's evaluate why. Let's find out why. So, if we try to reframe that in a way, and if we're trying to look for how you can utilize this for your life, this is a great time to do proofreading work or editing work, right? So, if you have stuff where you need a lot of attention to detail and where you need to be critical, if you have any tasks like this in your career or in your school life, then do them during this cycle phase because you're a natural at it now, right? You're naturally prone to finding all the mistakes and things. So if there's any part of your job where that is needed, great timing for that. You'll be feeling food cravings, and comfort foods are starting to become enticing again. So cool. Go indulge. This is also self care. So, the important thing during this pre menstruation phase is to not judge yourself and again, to not fall into the trap of feeling anxiety about what's to come if you experience bad periods, um, but rather to try and use it to reflect, to go journal, to go do, like I say, slower movement kind of activities, and to take good care of yourself, self-care. And self-care also means it doesn't have to be a fancy little bath like this, which can put pressure on a person again to try and make their bathroom look clean and nice and everything. Self-care can also just be to say, acknowledging, hey, I'm dead tired, I don't want to see anybody. That's the boundary I'm communicating to the world today. That can also be self-care, right? So make sure to listen to yourself, really. If you do feel tired, this is not a good time to judge yourself for being tired again. On the contrary, this is the time to say, oh, I'm feeling tired. Okay, maybe I should take a nap. Um, and that's totally cool. This is where it comes in handy again to say we're cyclical. So I know that if I'm good to myself now, and if I actually listen to these early signs of, tiredness and fogginess and being overly critical and stuff, if I use this time to just simply then go inwards and reflect and just be with myself instead of being out in the world, then I'll be able to enjoy the next phase sooner, maybe. And that's one of the effects that I've noticed in my own case as well, and with other people that have similarly heavy periods and bad period experiences with bad cramping. My periods are the worst if I don't take care of myself during the week before. So if I don't give myself this sort of inner dark moon phase, this pre-menstruation phase, and if I don't close myself off from the world for a day or two, usually sometimes 3 days, um, then it's just going to be terrible for longer. My periods will be heavier and longer and more painful. So it's it's really important to take this premenstruation phase and to track how you're feeling and to not then judge yourself, but rather use it as signs to say, okay, if I don't listen to this now, my body's going to show me next week. And for all of us who've had bad experiences with their periods, I think we can relate. So I hope you take this once again as an invitation to start learning about yourself and what your body is telling you and what kinds of signs are it's sending you, and to just listen to that more. So we've come to the end, and I would love it if you had some questions, or if there's anything you'd like to share, um, that came up for you, or if you, yeah, how are you feeling? Cool. If there's nothing, I will end it here and would like to thank you all for joining on this nice Monday evening. Um, I'd like to invite you to sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already and to follow us on the socials. Um, this is this is very, very cool that you opened up to learning something new and maybe getting some new insights. I will send around the recording and the guidebook that I mentioned a couple of times, tomorrow for you guys, so you can get everything downloaded and prepared. And there's also some printables in there for you to start tracking on paper if you don't want to use an app, or if you're not as crazy and you want to use an Excel sheet for it. But definitely keep in touch. I'd love to have you, to have to chat with you more. And yeah, if there's nothing else, I would say thank you so much and see you soon somewhere, maybe on the socials.